Real quickly before we move on to the next topic, I need to get a new water. I'm going to turn my camera off because I'm in my hotel room. I'm in boxers right now, and I can't give the full view
That's
to
too
the.
much. Okay, I
All
can
right.
I can set our topics for
All right, you
today.
set it up.
Obviously, yeah, we have like I said, we got a lot to talk about today, and thankfully, the Mariners did everything they could to change the narrative of how we were going to discuss them today. Because up until yesterday evening, this was going to be more of a vent fest, I think, than anything else with the Mariners, and they go out and they make a big trade and change that whole narrative. We'll start there. We've got a couple other topics that we can get to later on, but obviously the big one, especially for people around here, is the Seattle Mariners.
Yeah, and I guess so. Like Randy Arozarena is who they trade for. Tampa Bay Rays outfielder, who a couple of years ago was like taking over. He was like a spark plug for the Rays, and it seemed like he was going to become a star. It seemed like he was going to become a star, and then he's played very well. He's been a very good player, but never really ascended to like that star level that we've seen a lot of like Rays obscure players go up to, and then and this year he's struggling. And I'm curious because to me, I expected to see a lot more dissent on this than I saw on Twitter, and I didn't search very closely. I want to read this one tweet that I found just remarkably annoying that I included in our notes, by the way. It was, and I think this guy is Jared Carabas. Is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, he's like a national baseball guy.
He could be a guy that because I just don't follow I'm not annoyed by baseball writers enough. This could be one of these guys that's super annoying all the time. But he said, the Mariners offense is dreadful at every position. Randy Arozarena is only one guy. Not sure he alone can change what's been one of the worst offenses in baseball. Surely he can help, but one man alone is not saving Seattle from being able to score or from not being able to score runs. They need more. Okay. The thing that annoys me about this is he could have had this tweet in drafts just waiting to put in the name of the first person they traded for. You can't trade for a whole new offense in one trade. It doesn't happen. It's an unrealistic expectation he had of that is, and I'm sure there's people out there. First off, Arozarena is not a household name. He's like I said, he was.
I would say he's in baseball. He probably is. Now I get it. You could argue that there's not really any household names in baseball. Like you might be able to find people who aren't baseball fans that know Shohei Ohtani, maybe know Mike Trout, but after that, there aren't really any. If you're a perennial all-star, if you're a guy who's been going to the all-star game, he won the home run derby in Seattle last year, he's as close to a household name in baseball as it gets at this point. But I would say that Arozarena, first of all, to address that tweet, yes, that I've been very annoyed with those people as well. I've heard a lot of the initial reaction since this trade went down about 15 hours ago. My overall reaction, I'll start out by saying, is very positive. I think this is a great pickup for the Mariners. If you, for whatever reason, think this is a bad pickup, I don't think you're a serious baseball fan, because we know what they gave up to get this guy. It's none of their top 10 prospects. The two guys they give up and the player to be named, probably not in the top 10. We don't know about the player to be named yet. But they gave up less than what you would expect a team to give up for a guy of Arozarena's stature.
Sure.
So in that regard,
let me make one correction. They gave up Brody Hopkins was the Fangraphs 7th rated prospect. So still not in that.
Always has, they always have a different take than everybody else. But
sure, and I can look at the other lists, but that's the one that I value the most. And but my point is it's still not in that. It's still a tier down from their top prospects.
Yeah, well, and here's the thing with the Arozarena. I mean, the point that was being made in that Carabas tweet, and that I've heard from a lot of people, is obviously one Randy Arozarena is not going to change this entire Mariners offense. That would be impossible for any one person to do. You could go get the best hitter on the planet. They're not, Shohei Ohtani's not changing this lineup. But you have to start somewhere. And, to the Mariners' credit, not only did they really kind of jumpstart this trade market in a way. We've seen a couple other trades today as well that have really seems like things are starting to take off now that the Mariners kind of broke the seal and made a big move for Arozarena. It's kind of opened things up for all the teams. So they go out and they kind of jump everybody, get a big name. They did this a couple years ago with Luis Castillo on the pitching side. We know that. They kind of jumped the market there. Got Castillo before the flurry of trades began up to the deadline. And the problem is when they made that deal for Castillo, they really didn't do much else after that. So to the Mariners' credit today, there's been at least rumors from reporters out there that the Mariners are staying active, still looking for another bat and looking for another a relief pitcher, which are all things that they need. We know that. I mean, at least one other bat would be helpful. The fact they didn't give up any of their biggest name prospect, the guys that we've talked about, that other people have talked about, Colt Emerson, Cole Young, Harry Ford, guys like that, they didn't give up any of those big names. So they still have those guys in-house to be able to go pick up a really big name bat if they want to. So it gives them a lot of flexibility in the next couple of days before the deadline hits. And frankly, yes, if they don't make any other moves for any other hitters, then this deadline was probably not the success we thought it might be last night when that deal was made. So they have to compound this with some other moves. But for starters, this is about as good as it gets.
Let me argue against that slightly, because we're going to talk about the future of the front office today, and that's if I'm and we're going to talk about it in more detail, but if I'm John Stanton and if I'm like deciding what I'm going to let Jerry Dipoto do, being hopefully a lame duck GM, you and I both hope that he's a lame duck GM. I'm not letting him go and trade the whole farm system, frankly, and also especially like this team has collapsed in recent weeks. I don't see any reason at this point, and it's been 2 weeks since you and I have talked, and the Mariners arguably could not have been worse in the last 2 weeks. There's like no reason to believe this team at this point has a deep postseason run in them. And I made the argument last time. Yeah. This pitching staff is not actually historically good. They're very good. They are very good, but they're not like historically incredible. I think you have to now. I said it then when they had a better record, but now when your playoff odds are this much lower, and there's a much greater chance that whatever you do is going to lead to a team that does not make the playoffs and also doesn't have a great farm system. Randy Arozarena is controllable, I think, through 2027, I believe.
26. He's a free agent in 27.
Is it 26? Free agent 27. Yeah. Okay, but still, you're like
so you
multiple years of team control. So you're that is the only kind of player I'm letting Jerry Dipoto go get, is a guy who you can control beyond 2024.
Yeah,
personally.
I mean, I get it. I think Seattle fans are so sensitive to this subject because of the Eric Bedard trade. And we have to remember that the Eric Bedard trade...
I don't care about the Eric Bedard trade.
I don't think we'd have as strong an opinion on this if we hadn't been burned so badly.
but they did the Cliff Lee trade right after that. Like, that's not...
It was a year later. I mean, it was the Bedard trade.
That's what I mean.
Was the end of... But here's where this timeline's important. The Bedard trade was the end of the Bavasi era. The Bavasi era was, I have to go get this pitcher at all costs because this is my final year no matter what. Where the Cliff Lee trade, I believe, was the next regime because Bavasi gets himself fired in the middle of that season that they acquire Bedard. So there's a big difference in those two trades because the trade that comes with a brand new regime, they're not getting fired anytime soon. So they can freely make that deal and not have to worry about the ramifications. But that Bedard trade, I feel like we've been worried about the second coming of that Bedard trade with every trade that's been made ever since over the past 15 years. This was so long ago now. We have to get over that. I get what you're saying. I mean, the Mariners love to acquire these guys that have control, whether it be club control like Arozarena, or even if it's just a contract that they've signed that, is team friendly, more or less. That's always been their MO. So, in a lot of ways, Randy Arozarena makes a ton of sense because of that.
You know who he reminds me of actually from like I don't know that his, actually, I don't even think his profile is that unfavorable to this guy. It reminds me of the trade that brought Mitch Haniger here. Obviously, they traded major leaguers over there, but it's like they traded valuable, but not like franchise-altering pieces, so they thought anyway. Although Ketel Marte has done really a lot to make that untrue. But it's, I think it's a trade that you would have been frustrated by a couple weeks ago if that was the thing. And now it kind of feels like it's the best hedge I could have imagined available to them at this point. And I think they're at a point where they have to hedge because you go trade for, I'm saying like, there's not a realistic scenario where they trade for Vladimir Guerrero Jr. and someone else important. Like that's it. That's the one guy you're going to get. That's my opinion. You're going to have to give up a huge chunk. Maybe you get another medium tier guy. But if you go do that, that's it. And again, I think you get Vladimir Guerrero Jr. on this team, I think it doesn't impact their playoff odds that much.
Yeah, look, I'm sensitive to your plight because I know you are prospect.
Well, what do you think they should do then? Because you keep poo-pooing what I'm saying, but have a take then.
Well, okay, so let's take a step back, man. First of all, I want to get your initial reaction. As soon as you heard about this trade, I don't want to think about the contract, don't think about the prospects, don't think about anything else. The first thing we found out when this trade happened was that the Mariners were acquiring Randy Arozarena, and that was it. So we didn't know anything else. So our thoughts couldn't be, couldn't go anywhere else. What were your thoughts when you heard the Mariners were acquiring Randy Arozarena?
I'm happy about it. He's a guy that I like. Yes. He's an athletic, solid hitting. He's not a great defender, but a good enough defender to he can exist in your lineup, exist in your outfield. I have no beef with it. I actually was worried when I looked it up that he was like gonna be a free agent after this year, and to find out that if they had given up what they gave up and he was going to be a free agent after this year, I wouldn't have been as happy about it. But the fact that he has 2.5 years of team control was enough for me to be like, I know this is I was happy with it before knowing that information, to answer your question as directly as possible. And then when you factor in, they didn't give up any of the top guys. I think Arozarena has a very good chance to perform. And we did this when we talked about the alternatives to Vlad. I think Arozarena in 2024 has a very strong chance of equaling Vlad Guerrero's performance the remainder of 2024. He's older than him. So if you keep him long term, you have 2.5 more years, but if you keep him long term, there's a chance you don't get the same return as getting a younger guy early in his career. But yeah, I mean, overall, I think it's like, to me, it seemed like a win-win. It's like you didn't give up a ton, and he's a good player that can actually play defense. You have to. There's like, Vlad is not going to play a valuable defensive position, and he's going to cost a ton, both in trade compensation, and you're probably going to have to extend him for a huge amount of money. And then he's also like, there's a lot of question marks around Vlad that I'm not comfortable with trading a bunch of prospects for. Yeah,
to take it back to the original question, I felt the same way. I mean, I think the immediate reaction to finding out you picked up a guy like Randy Arozarena is very positive. And I don't, if even when you find out the return, I feel like it remains positive because, there's going to be people out there, the people that on Facebook groups and on Twitter will always propose those trades that are like, what if we take like our 30 worst guys at AA and offer them to the Angels for Mike Trout? Do you think
what if we trade the entire city of Everett?
those people are going to be mad about every trade because they don't want to give anything up and get anything in return. They don't understand how bartering as a whole works. So there's going to be people who are upset, of course, but the vast majority of people, I feel like, were good with an Arozarena trade because of a number of things. I mean, one, he's been a very productive major leaguer. I think that our impression of Arozarena has always been higher than what he's actually done. So that's, I don't know if you want to call that a knock against him or what, but his public consciousness, he came to the public consciousness in 2020 in the postseason. No one had ever heard of this guy prior to that. And then he just erupts in the 2020 postseason, and everybody saw it because COVID. So that's all we had to do was watch the baseball playoffs, right? So everybody saw this happen. So it made him this overnight superstar where, in a normal season, maybe a guy who even performs that well in the playoffs doesn't have that many eyes on him, right? And so we've known this guy to be maybe larger than life as far as his numbers would indicate for a number of years now. There's a lot to like about him. I mean, obviously he's productive and, all of his numbers, even for as much as he struggled early in this season, and we know he's picked it up late. I mean, if you can go look at his numbers for the last 2 months, they're pretty good. But
can I give you some encouraging numbers and then temper them a little bit?
Yes, go ahead.
So by expected weighted on base average, it's a StatCast stat that's basically like a combination of speed and like how well he's hitting the ball, he's like he would be the 30th best hitter with neutral luck in baseball. Easily better than any Mariners hitter at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah. And a guy that I would quantify, or a way that I would quantify that luck, he has, I think it's the 58th. No, sorry. He would be let me rephrase this. 58th best hitter, 30th worst luck in baseball. He has the biggest gap between his actual weighted on base and his expected weighted on base. So like the expected weighted on base is like, how well is this dude hitting the ball? What would we expect from a guy hitting the ball that well? He's gotten bad luck. And of course, there's there's probably less impact that an opposing team could have because there's less shifting and stuff that can occur. Other guys that appear high on that list, though, this is going to be disconcerting when you drop this guy into the Seattle lineup. I think Julio's 5th in bad luck, and Cal Raleigh is like 10th. Like, these guys are experiencing bad luck, and you go, is it because I could see being in Seattle, hitting a ball really well, and it not becoming a home run being a major cause of this? And you go like,
or exit velo. Exit velo.
Well, exit velo is part of the.
Yeah,
exit velo is part of the.
Very hard.
Right, right. But it's all of the things that make like a well hit ball. Like how fast is it coming off the bat, the launch angle, all that stuff, and their speed, and that is like this big calculation. And yeah, so like a guy that hits a ball that would be a home run in 29 parks might not be a home run in T-Mobile. And you're dropping this guy who's got this same kind of bad luck profile into there. And I'm worried. That's the one thing I'm worried about. It's at no fault of Arozarena's on his own. I think he's like, as an acquisition, the process is great. I love the trade. I love the fact that they didn't give up one of those top prospects. These are guys that you actually will never miss. Sometimes people like, when the Mariners, there's a friend of ours that said, when the Mariners win a World Series, when they traded for Luis Castillo, you'll never remember these guys. And it's like, well, when Luis Castillo may not be alive when the Mariners win a World Series at this rate. So you might not have a memory period. You got a Joe Biden brain by the time the Mariners win a World Series.
Well, it's always nerve-wracking trading with the Rays. I mean, that the Rays do a good job of developing and bringing to the majors all the guys they seemingly acquire for. But, the Mariners have made a number of trades with the Rays in the Dipoto era, and there really haven't been any that have burned them. I mean, I would say it goes both ways. They haven't had a lot of success with the guys they've acquired, and they also haven't been burned by the young guys they've sent over there, really. So it kind of, in some ways, it's like, okay, there's some precedent here that these two organizations want to be so similar in the way that they do things. The Mariners, it feels like, want to be the Rays in a lot of ways, that I can't imagine a situation where either team is really fleecing the other. Now, on the surface, I think the initial reaction to this trade was that the Mariners in some ways had fleeced the Rays. If you went and looked at all the reaction from Rays fans, they didn't know who these two prospects were, and frankly, why should they? I mean, when you're talking about guys who are outside a team's top 10, even for a team or a system as deep as the Mariners, those aren't guys that you usually hear a lot about. You hear about the top 5 in everybody's system, and after that, it's kind of a crapshoot. So
one thing I will say is I think we can definitively say the Rays rank prospects differently than Baseball America or whoever you're using as they're probably closer to that Fangraphs list. Yeah. And I think the fact that the Rays traded for those two guys, look out for those two guys to be in the majors in the next couple of years, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reality, though, I mean, to me is like, if you're the Mariners, you cannot worry about that. You can't worry about what your prospects who are 3 or 4 years away are going to do in 3 or 4 years, because your window to win is right now. And it's going to be tough for the people that love prospects. This deadline is going to be painful, I think, because even with just a few days left, they have to go out and make another move or two. At this point, they're committed, right? They're pot committed.
I disagree with you.
Even though we all know that the Arozarena is controlled for 2.5 more years, if you make a deal like that, it signals we're going for it now. I think that's part of it. I think it's whether you believe it or not.
No, I think it's a hedge. I think it signals to you. I don't think it signals to the rest of the league. I don't think that if I'm that ownership group, I'm not letting them make a big splash like that is going to potentially mortgage the future of the team. And I think this is a trade that absolutely did not do that.
Well, I
I will
don't think they're
say,
going to do that. I don't think they have to worry about that because I don't think Jerry DiPoto's job is in danger. As much as people like us don't want to see this guy running this organization anymore, I think the assurance he has from ownership is that, hey, man, just go out and do your job at this deadline. Get us a few pieces that are going to help us. You're going to be fine. And I think we've seen it carry on for so long now that I don't think there's any alternative.
I think, I don't know if we might be saying the same thing and you're just saying it in a worse way than me, because I think like are you saying they're going to go out nah, they like you more. There's more people coming from your Twitter. That's not fair. This is like, my fucking Twitter is just inundated with this dude, Cat Turd. I can't get rid of Cat Turd in my Twitter feed. I mute him and he still shows back up somehow. And, he Mark Cuban put out a poll and he's like, I flipped your poll. This is like you flipping the answer. Maybe they'll like your side more. And also I think like yours is a more sympathetic point of view. It's like the fans want them to go all in this year. It doesn't really matter what the fans want. Yeah. If I'm the ownership group, this team is not good enough, in my opinion, to do that. And I think that they might go out and make a couple other minor acquisitions. And minor meaning like if you consider Arozarena to be a minor deal, I think that along those lines, I could see them making a couple other like value adds like Arozarena if they're available. I don't think I'm letting them trade more than maybe one guy out of that top echelon of prospects, maybe none of those guys. I'd probably lean towards none of those guys. And it's not because I don't think you can never trade those guys. It's because the Mariners have never, like, they're not at a point where they like actually have a reason to like go all in right now. I don't think they're all in right now. And especially like, I mean, I think that DFAing Ty France was not actually a move that was like giving up on this season. I think that's actually a move to win this year because he's been so bad. Mm-hmm. But I think that this team is just not good enough to do that. And not only are they not good enough, you no longer have this like big buffer of wins you stole in one-run games and close games early in the season to fall back on, where you're leading the division by a huge chunk of games. And now you're like, well, we're in a position where we have to capitalize on this. You don't have that luxury anymore. So now you're like hedging between a team that probably won't make the playoffs. Before it was like a team that'll make it to the playoffs, maybe we'll lose in the first round if you don't do anything. Now it's like a team that's probably not going to make the playoffs, or a team that maybe gets in the playoffs and makes a short run or loses in the first round. Like that's probably the like 80% of your bell curve is that.
I guess the argument would be no one would have thought the Diamondbacks would get to the World Series last year, right? They were kind of in the same position the Mariners are in right now, where they're more or less on the outside looking in. Their division itself is very difficult, and their path to the playoffs wasn't very clear when they made a few moves. Now, going out and getting Paul Sewald from the Mariners, that's kind of a mid-level move, right? And I've actually heard people debate, just today, whether Arozarena is like a big move or a little move. And it's like, I would argue that it's pretty big because he immediately becomes the best hitter on this team, especially with Julio out. I mean, if Julio's playing, then
sure.
Obviously Julio's a little bit
better. Well, I guess that's the other part of it too that we haven't really talked about is like, what is this team positioned like now with Julio out for probably a shorter amount of time? JP Crawford's going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. It looks like what does this team look like at the end of that? Like it's a rough. I think the Mariners are in a position that is unenviable in that like there's almost no winning whatever they do at the deadline.
Yeah, I mean they're in a tough spot right now because of the injuries, but anyone can go look at JP's numbers. He wasn't lighting the world on fire. I mean, that's
another guy who, by the way, bad luck hitting the ball hard. Bad luck.
Yeah, but what he brings on defense is invaluable for sure. I mean, Dylan Moore at shortstop is not the same guy. We've had this conversation before when JP was hurt. And obviously he's one of those guys who, is kind of a leader on your team too. So it always hurts to lose those types. Julio, I think, will be back a lot quicker. It seems like he's probably not going to be spending too much time on the IL, hopefully. And if that's the case, then, you're getting back an impact piece shortly. Arozarena, I mean, yeah, in this interim before Julio comes back, it's asking a lot of any one person to help carry this lineup. Luckily, I mean, the Mariners start a series today with the White Sox, who we know they're terrible. Granted, they are facing the White Sox two best pitchers, who are probably being showcased a little bit at this point coming up to the deadline. So I'm guessing they're probably going to be given a long leash to have a good outing. But at the same time, this is a team you should beat. And luckily for the Mariners down the stretch, their schedule is still pretty favorable. So even with, even when you consider all the things like they're putting together this like fringe AAA lineup right now where they're trying to weather the storm of these injuries, they have shown an ability up to this point, even with a subpar lineup, to manage out wins and to squeak out some wins. And they're in a bad stretch right now. I mean, that's what this conversation would have been without the Arozarena trade.
Yeah.
How bad things are going and what they're could possibly do next. And now it's really, I mean, you can see just one deal like that, how much it changes the narrative quickly.
Yeah. So June 18th, the Mariners have, according to Fangraphs, 91% probability of making the playoffs. As of today, they are 38.8%. They actually got down as low as 35.4%.
Basically 1 in 3 when you consider that the Rangers and the Astros are right there.
And the Rangers are right there. They're like in the 20s, and the Astros are higher, but not a lock, obviously, because they're all very close, and there's a bunch of possible ways this could turn out. And I do think that if you could make, from my perspective, if you could make 3 of these Randy Arozarena trades, you do them. Like, there's no doubt about that. To me, this trade signals nothing because he's relatively young. He's 29, or in his age 29 season, he could be 30 by now. But and there's multiple years of team control. That's like, it's if the question is, like, yes, it works for this year. He does improve the team this year, but he also, like, it doesn't mortgage the future. In fact, there's future value. You might end up extending him or whatever. If you can make 3 more of those or 2 more of those trades and give up that caliber of prospect, I'm fine with gutting the second tier and beyond of this farm system, because I think they're actually really good. I mean, especially, I guess the other part of this is, and I really am it's disconcerting to hear you say that you think there's no way Dipoto's gone, because I don't know if you tell me this, because I know you occasionally, I never try to put you in a position to like admit to having inside information, while I know sometimes you do have some information that is not available to the public. Is this something that is like, do you have authority to say that, or that's your guess?
The feeling I get from people who would know better than I do is that he's not going anywhere. So, I mean, I think it would probably take a monumental collapse. Like, not only do they miss the playoffs, but
is this true?
They absolutely, shit the bed in the process. If this is true, if what you have up on your screen there is true, then we can break some news right here on this show.
Breaking news.
Jeff Passan has it now. The Mariners are acquiring Yimi Garcia from the Blue Jays for outfielder Jonathan Clase.
Yeah,
that's another great trade.
Without looking it up, Yimi Garcia, tell me about him.
He's a hard-throwing right-hander. He was a closer a couple years ago, I think, for the Marlins. He's been more of a setup man in Toronto, but they've had some real struggles in their bullpen this year. So he's been called upon to close quite a bit for them. And yeah, I mean, the Mariners have seen him a few times in games. And, of course, he just carves up the Mariners like Swiss cheese because they can't hit anything. But good right-handed pitcher. He's like exactly what this bullpen needs. It's one of those things where, if everybody in this bullpen is healthy, if Stanek isn't, imploding 1 out of every 3 appearances, and Gregory Santos can be relied on to throw back-to-back games and doesn't constantly flirt with injury every time he goes out there, then you probably don't need a guy of Garcia's caliber as much. But this is a guy that really helps. I mean, this is an 8th inning guy, can be a guy that if Munoz is unavailable, he can go out and close a game for you. He's everything you want Ryan Stanek to be without the meltdowns. Stanek has so many meltdowns where he's just like, he'll walk a couple batters or throw a fastball right down the heart of the plate. Garcia is a little bit nastier with his stuff. and just a little bit more reliable in that regard. And we've obviously seen what Jonathan Clase brings to the table. It's not anything that was going to help this team anytime soon. He got a couple call-ups just to fill in when guys were in need, but he hasn't proven he can really hit yet, and maybe he'll find that in Toronto, but at this point you wouldn't consider this a big loss.
Yeah, I'm basically on that. I think the Class A has a potential to be I would say he has potential to be a quad A guy for sure. He's got like the classic, like relatively low power output, even at the AAA level, and then like a ton of walks and like a reasonable strikeout rate that just absolutely did not translate when he got to the majors. 43 plate appearances, not a big enough sample size to give up on the guy yet, but I'm with you. To me, it feels like another a big hedge, and I like it, like a guy. And it's also like we've talked about it. Like I think the Mariners need arms. This pitching staff, especially the bullpen, needs help. And they got it in Santos. I'm like Stanek is interesting because every time I watch him pitch, I'm like, this guy's fucking great. And then you see a meltdown, and you're like, oh man.
He's streaky. He's very streaky, which you cannot have. Your 8th or 9th inning guys can't be streaky. We've seen that in the past with Fernando Rodney. You just need a guy who's solid and you can depend on. And Garcia is
the hazard of that is that
name.
By nature, like high leverage relievers are often very streaky. So it's tough. And you remember the failures. I mean, Rodney statistically was a great closer in Seattle. I believe. I guess I'd have to go back and look, but you remember the just like absolute meltdowns and the stressful games more than you remember the like maybe streaks of success that didn't get as much. I guess absolutely. What was I going to say? Like headlines? What do we do? We got to get some web inches or something like that. I don't know what we, real quick. Fredo says they need to sell the team to another rich Seattleite that wants to win. Dipoto isn't the problem. It's ownership. I can agree with that overall. I do think like if they had a bigger budget, and they like reasonably could have a bigger budget, if they had a richer or more willing to spend owner. And you and I have also talked about I'm starting to fall in love with the idea of Jeff Bezos just buying every Seattle franchise and owning all of sports. He's like the Walton family of Seattle. I like that idea. But you just like you can fire a GM, you can't fire an owner. We can root for the team to sell to someone else, and that guy could be better or worse. I think what we've seen from Dipoto is a guy who can put together a slightly above average team with an about average payroll, and that's fine, but that's not like that doesn't keep you a job for decades.
Yeah, I mean, I always think it's funny that Mariner fans have to put themselves into one camp. It's like it doesn't have to be either or. Like everybody is when you have never been to a World Series, everybody's the problem. It's not that ownership is the only problem. It's not that Jerry Dipoto is the only problem. The people that want to blame everything on Scott Service amaze me, because it's like, if you know anything about the role of a manager in Major League Baseball right now, there's not much that they really control. They're a people manager. They're just there to make sure that everyone's feeling okay. So it's everybody. It's a systematic failure up till this point. I mean, it's nice to see them making moves. But, when you're in year 9 and have made one playoff appearance, that's a total failure across the board. Whether you want to blame ownership, front office, management, or the players, you're right. It doesn't matter. Like, we're arguing over nothing. Yeah. You are right. If you think this is ownership's fault, yes, you are correct. If you think it's the front office's fault, you are correct. If you think it's the players' fault, you are correct. We're all right, but we just want to argue with one another for no reason. It's like everybody has failed up to this point. So, even in making these trades, this is a great start. You have to give, for as much as I don't like Jerry Dipoto and the front office, you have to give them credit for doing what they need to do and filling positions of need as we head down a critical stretch of games for them.
Do you kind of feel like the Arozarena criticism, the criticism of that trade or the skepticism of that trade is just like people who already are ready to write off the Mariners front office, which by the way is me, but I try to be objective when something like this happens. To me, it's like very powerful to be able to say, like there's comics that I don't like, for example, and I'll be like, yeah, I don't like them, but they're funny. Like to be able to give a person you don't like a compliment, to me is very powerful.
I mean, and I think it's the internet. I mean, that's just how people are. Like you have a limited
but I'm not just talking about like, obviously there's dumbasses that are like fans, but I'm talking about like how much confirmation bias is going into this? Like, I think Dipoto's bad, so this trade has to be bad because I think Dipoto's bad. Like, from not just, I mean, like media personalities also, people who make some amount of money or have some legitimacy that are just like the Jared Carabas or Carabas? What are we going with on this? Carabas. Like that to me is such obvious confirmation bias where it's like, I just don't like this dude, so I whatever he does must be bad because he did it.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of that with the Mariners. I mean, I see it every day, basically.
It's also a pretty safe position to take with the Mariners, fairly, or to be fair.
Yeah, I mean, if you're betting on them to fail, then yes, you are going to be right more often than not in all aspects. It doesn't matter what it is. You're going to be right more often than not if you bet on them to fail. Yeah. But I try to approach it, my shtick online is that I'm like the most negative Mariners fan in the world and I make fun of them all the time, but in reality that's not how I feel. Like when they're on a run, I am buying in, and when they're down, I'm down, like
we get occasional sarcastic optimism out of your Twitter account.
Yes, I mean but that's what the way that I approach it is like people need to lighten up. And the Mariners, if you take them too seriously, all they're going to do is make you mad or sad or whatever negative emotion you want to feel. So I'm going to try to make you laugh in those times, right? And that's kind of the brand that I've built is when things are going bad for the Mariners, which they often do, I'm going to at least try to poke fun at it so maybe you feel a little bit better about it. And but there are people out there that take that shit very seriously. They don't want to laugh when things are bad. Yeah. And I guess my message to them would just be like, if you are taking the Mariners that seriously, you need to find a new team because they're going to let you down a lot. So maybe even wouldn't pay attention to sports. Like in general, sports are probably not for you if you don't have a sense of humor.
When was the last time? I mean, that's to me the deal is like I'll tell this story real quickly that I might have even told on the podcast before, so I'll go through it, but. When the Seahawks lost to the Patriots, I was at a bar with some friends. We had rented a back room. My favorite bar in the whole world, rest in peace, Copper Door. It was in Tacoma. It was right across the street from where I used to live. And my friend had a pint glass in his hand when the interception happened, and he threw the pint glass against the wall, shattered everywhere. Yeah. And I was upset, obviously. I will say, I was actually I could feel the letdown, I'm not saying I had clinical depression, but that did it made me sad for a couple weeks. I was actually blown away by how emotionally affected I was by that game. That's the last time I can remember, but it was also a signal to me of oh, you could be this fucking idiot that's throwing a pint glass very easily if you let yourself go down this road. And also, once you have kids and a mortgage, you're I can't be fighting people because they have an opinion that I disagree with on the Mariners,
Yeah. That's the reality of sports, man. It's if you're not treating this as what it is, like a distraction from reality in some ways, then we all got to lighten up a little bit. But yeah, you can't get too worked up about the Mariners. They're kind of just a punching bag and oftentimes a joke.
But also keep listening to our podcast, folks. We need the listeners.
Well, I mean, I appreciate it when they try to do the right thing. Whether the right thing is selling or buying. All you want is for your team to do what is perceived to be the right thing, right? If they're in a down year, hey, sell off those veteran assets and go acquire talent for the future. If they're in a window where they can actually win right now, then go ahead and go out and acquire guys who will help you reach that goal. That's all you want from your team. Whether they you want them to succeed, of course, but you just want them to be headed in the right direction, I think, most of the time. So for me, it's seeing trades like this, or seeing them be active up to a deadline. Those are all positive signs. And it's interesting because we spend so much time, not just us, but everybody spends so much time breaking down what's going to happen leading up to a trade deadline. You hear the same names over and over again. Vlad, Luis Robert, guys like that. Even guys that the Mariners had no interest in. Garrett Crochet, a pitcher from the White Sox. You hear these names over and over again. I didn't hear too much of Randy Arozarena or Yimi Garcia. And the Mariners have been good at finding guys. A couple years ago when they got Luis Castillo, that wasn't a name you were hearing a ton of when they made that deal. Sure. They find ways to make trades that maybe aren't the most readily apparent, because I think the reality of those names that you hear, if you anticipate a guy being traded who's a big name player, the value, the cost of that guy is going to be probably pretty high because if there's enough smoke around a guy like that, then the fire is going to be huge, right? And so if you want to go get Vlad, if you want to go get Luis Robert, that's going to cost you some of your best prospects in the system, top 5 guys for sure. And to go out and kind of live on those margins, as we know the Mariners love to do in all aspects, but to still get big name guys that plug holes, that's important, and that's what they're doing.
Have we exhausted Mariners talk? Are we done with Mariners talk?
Probably. We might.
I can't think of other angles to look at this from. I hope that, I'm hopeful. These 2 trades are hopeful to me because they're the kind of moves that I would have wanted them to make. I would be thrilled if the Arozarena trade was the most they gave up in prospect value. I hate to be the wet blanket. One thing I will say that I agree with you on is, though I think living on the miracle of the Diamondbacks making it to the World Series is, I think, can be silly if you to what extent, depending on to what extent you leverage yourself to exercise that miracle. Making it to the playoffs is the only way to get through that tournament. And I do think making the playoffs, period, is valuable. And you don't know. I mean, if they make it to the playoffs, let's say there's what are there now? 14 teams, I mean, in the playoffs? Is it 14 now?
3 wild cards and 3 division winners, so 6 and 6, 12.
And there's 2. Oh yeah, that's right. And there's 2 guys. So 12 teams. Let's say the Mariners go in and they're a 1 in 20 shot to win the World Series, 1 in 30 shot to win. Take the ticket when you can for a reasonable price.
You have to.
Yeah.
I mean, we saw it. They had 1 home playoff game when they made the postseason a couple years ago. It galvanized the fan base. The entire place was packed. People were amped. That was 1 game. They didn't even win the damn game. It's like, if you can go back, I mean, it's a long time in the past now, but just thinking about when they were successful in the late 90s and early 2000s, the energy around the team every time out, that permeates. It's not just that you make money off the postseason run, that carries into the next year, and you can.
I think might. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say. I mean, you saw it after that postseason run, bleeding into last season, and then you see the inverse of that this year. You have 1 bad off season, like the Mariners had this past off season, and a lot of that energy just goes away coming into the new season. So it's important to continue that momentum. I think that's where, at least in this era, we'll call it the Dipoto era, that's where the Mariners have really struggled, is to carry out momentum. When they have a good thing going, they seemingly do a 180 and start selling guys off, and then they lose that momentum with the fan base. And that's an important part of continuing a run. I know it can be scary to, put all your chips in at one point or another, but there is an element of needing to do that from time to time. And for whatever reason, this regime has been hesitant to do that, which can be good or can be bad. I mean, you mentioned it, it's important to hedge sometimes. And I agree, it is important to hedge sometimes, but there are other times where it is beneficial to go in. I mean, the 95 Mariners more or less went all in. They started trading everybody to acquire talent.
Vince Coleman, I think Mark Whitten,
Andy Bennis. Andy Bennis was the big one that needed a pitcher. Mark Whitten was 96. It was the next year.
Oh, okay.
But 95, Tim Belcher. They needed they needed so many starting pitchers, so they get Tim Belcher. They get Andy Bennis. They go get Vince Coleman in a waiver deal in August. They made all these acquisitions, and they basically said, you know what, screw it. We're not trading A-Rod. A-Rod's our number 1 prospect. We're not trading him. But everybody else is basically up for grabs, and we're going to do whatever it takes. And that made a huge difference. I mean, it saved baseball in Seattle. It carried out the 6-year run.
Sorry, I'm reading the chat. Ricky Henderson was 2001, right?
2000, yes.
2000, okay.
Maybe those 5 years were a blur for Nick. That could be the positive. It's 95 to 2000, it's all the same. But that there is something to be said for that, because that kicked off a 6-year run of success. They didn't make the playoffs all 6 of those years, but it was a 6-year run where they kept momentum and it kept the fans involved. And frankly, it's kept a lot of those fans involved 20, 3 years later. A lot of the people that are here are still here thinking about that run in the past, and that's what brought them into baseball. So there is a huge importance on just building momentum, and hopefully for the Mariners, maybe this last offseason was an aberration. You can do something at this deadline, hopefully make the postseason, have a much better offseason this year than you did last year, and keep this thing rolling so that there's still energy going into the 2025 campaign.